Most people believe they lack discipline. They think the problem is willpower. They blame laziness. They assume they are simply not strong enough. But the truth is much deeper. Your brain is not designed to love discipline. It is designed to avoid discomfort. Your brain's primary goal is survival, not success, not growth. Survival. And for most of human history, survival depended on conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary effort, seeking immediate rewards. So your brain evolved to prefer easy actions, quick pleasure, minimal effort. That is why scrolling on your phone feels natural. Eating junk food feels satisfying. Avoiding difficult work feels comfortable. But discipline feels different. Discipline requires effort, focus, delayed reward, and your brain interprets these things as resistance, something to avoid. This is why starting is always the hardest part, not because the task is impossible, but because your brain is trying to protect you from discomfort. Now imagine sitting down to do something difficult. Study, work, exercise. Immediately your mind begins negotiating. I'll start later. Just one more break. This isn't the right time. These thoughts are not random, they are protective mechanisms. Your brain is trying to pull you back toward comfort. And most people obey these signals automatically. They delay, they procrastinate, they avoid. But here is the important part. Discipline is not about fighting your brain. It is about understanding it, because once you understand how your brain works, you can begin working with it instead of against it. Think of your brain like a system that follows patterns, habits, rewards, repetition. If a behavior feels painful and unrewarding, your brain resists it. If a behavior feels rewarding, your brain repeats it. This is why discipline feels so difficult at the beginning, because the reward is delayed. You study now, results appear later. You work now, success appears later. You exercise now, the benefit appears later. Your brain struggles with this delay. It prefers immediate feedback, immediate satisfaction, and when it doesn't receive that, motivation drops. This is the real reason most people fail to stay disciplined. Not because they are weak, but because they never learn how to align discipline with their brain's reward system. Now imagine if discipline felt rewarding, if starting felt satisfying, if progress felt immediate, everything would change. And this is where the idea of tricking your brain begins. Not manipulation, but alignment. You learn how to design your behavior in a way that your brain accepts. Instead of forcing discipline through pure willpower, you make it easier for your brain to cooperate. Because willpower alone is unreliable. Some days you feel motivated, other days you don't. But systems work even when motivation disappears. This is why highly disciplined people often appear different. They are not constantly fighting themselves. They have simply designed their habits differently. They have removed unnecessary resistance. They have created small rewards. They have built routines that feel natural. And over time, their brain begins associating discipline with positive outcomes instead of pain. Now consider something important. Your brain learns through repetition. If you repeatedly avoid difficult tasks, your brain learns that avoidance is safe. If you repeatedly face difficult tasks, your brain learns that effort is normal. The behavior you repeat becomes your default. This is why the beginning of discipline feels so hard. Because you are breaking an old pattern and creating a new one. At first, the new pattern feels unnatural, uncomfortable, difficult. But with repetition, it becomes easier. Because your brain adapts. Now imagine a person who never exercises. The first workout feels exhausting, painful, uncomfortable. But after weeks of repetition, something changes. The same activity feels normal, sometimes even enjoyable. The discomfort does not disappear completely, but the resistance decreases because the brain has adapted to the pattern. This is how discipline is built, not through force, through repetition, through understanding, through alignment. Now imagine if instead of seeing discipline as punishment, you begin seeing it as training. Training your brain, training your habits, training your identity. Each small action becomes part of a larger pattern, and that pattern eventually becomes your default behavior. The key is not intensity, it is consistency. Small actions repeated daily create powerful results. And once your brain begins associating those actions with progress, discipline starts feeling different. Not easy, but manageable. And that is where transformation begins. If your brain only repeats what feels rewarding, then the solution becomes clear. You don't need more willpower. You need better rewards. Most people fail at discipline because the reward is too far away. You study today, but results come months later. You work hard now, but success takes years. You exercise today, but visible change is slow. Your brain struggles with this delay. It asks a simple question: why am I doing this if I get nothing right now? And when it gets no answer, motivation disappears. This is where intelligent people do something different. They bring the reward closer. They create immediate feedback. Because your brain does not need a big reward, it needs a quick one. Think about how social media works. You scroll, you get instant dopamine. Like, comment, video, reward, reward, reward. Your brain learns quickly. This feels good. Repeat it. Now imagine applying the same system to discipline. Instead of waiting for a big result, you create small rewards after each action. You complete 20 minutes of focused work. You reward yourself with something simple: a short break, a favorite drink, a small moment of satisfaction. This trains your brain. Work, so reward. Focus, so reward. Effort, so reward. Over time, your brain begins associating discipline with positive feeling, and that changes everything. Now consider something deeper. Your brain does not measure success in years. It measures progress in moments. If it feels progress, it continues. If it feels nothing, it stops. This is why small wins are powerful. You don't need to finish everything. You just need to start and complete something small. Instead of saying, I need to study for 3 hours, you say, I'll study for 15 minutes. This removes pressure. Your brain stops resisting because the task feels easy. But once you start, something interesting happens. Momentum appears. 15 minutes turns into 30. 30 turns into an hour. And suddenly you are doing what you were avoiding, not because you forced yourself, because you tricked your brain into starting. Starting is everything because resistance exists only before action. Once you begin, resistance decreases. This is why highly disciplined people focus less on intensity and more on starting. They understand that starting is the real battle. Now consider another powerful technique: tracking progress. Your brain loves visible progress. It needs to see movement. That is why checklists feel satisfying. That is why crossing something off feels good. It creates a small sense of achievement, a small reward. Now imagine tracking your discipline daily. You complete your task, you mark it, you see the progress building. Day by day, this creates a chain, and your brain begins wanting to continue the chain because breaking progress feels uncomfortable. This is how habits are formed, not through motivation, through repetition and visible progress. Now think about how this changes your mindset. Instead of focusing on how hard the task is, you focus on completing small steps. Instead of thinking about the entire journey, you focus on today. One action, one win, one step forward. This removes overwhelm. And overwhelm is one of the biggest enemies of discipline. When something feels too big, your brain avoids it. But when something feels small, your brain accepts it. Now consider the emotional side of discipline. Most people associate discipline with pain, with restriction, with effort. But this association is learned, and anything learned can be changed. You can train your brain to associate discipline with progress, with growth, with control, with pride. Every time you complete a task, remind yourself, I did what I said I would do. That sentence builds identity, and identity is powerful. Because once you start seeing yourself as a disciplined person, your actions begin aligning with that identity. You don't need to force discipline anymore. You become it. Now imagine waking up and not debating whether you should work, not negotiating with yourself, but simply starting. Because it is who you are. This is the long-term goal, not forcing discipline every day, but building a system where discipline feels natural. Now consider how this process works over time. At the beginning, you rely on small tricks, small rewards, small steps. But gradually your brain adapts. The resistance decreases, the habit strengthens, and what once felt difficult becomes automatic. This is how discipline becomes effortless. Not easy, but automatic. And automatic behavior requires less energy, less decision-making, less resistance. This is why habits are so powerful. They remove the need for constant thinking. Now imagine your day filled with small automatic actions. You wake up and start working. You follow your routine. You complete tasks without overthinking. Your mind is not fighting itself anymore. It is cooperating. And that cooperation is the real goal. Because discipline is not about forcing yourself every day. It is about building a system where your brain works with you, not against you. Most people think discipline is a mental battle. They believe it's about forcing themselves to act, pushing harder, trying to stay motivated. But the truth is much simpler. Your environment controls your behavior more than your willpower ever will. If your environment makes distraction easy, you will get distracted. If your environment makes focus easy, you will stay focused. Your brain always follows the path of least resistance. It chooses what is easiest in the moment. That is why you can plan your day perfectly, but still end up scrolling on your phone for hours, because your environment makes distraction easier than discipline. Your phone is nearby, notifications are active, entertainment is one tap away. Your brain doesn't need motivation. It just needs access, and access decides behavior. Now imagine changing your environment instead of forcing your mind. You remove distractions. You place your phone far away. You create a clean workspace. You prepare everything before starting. Suddenly, something changes. Focus becomes easier, not because you became stronger, because resistance decreased. This is the secret highly disciplined people understand. They don't rely on motivation. They design their environment. Now think about this. If junk food is always in front of you, you will eat it. If your phone is always in your hand, you will scroll. If your bed is always nearby, you will lie down. But if healthy food is easy to access, you eat better. If your phone is out of reach, you focus more. If your workspace is ready, you start faster. Your behavior follows your environment, not your intentions. This is why trying to be disciplined in a bad environment is so difficult. You are fighting constant resistance, and your brain hates resistance, so it chooses comfort. But when you remove resistance, discipline becomes natural. Now imagine setting up your environment for success. Before you start working, everything is ready. No searching, no preparation, no delay. Just start. This removes friction. And friction is what creates procrastination. Even small friction matters. If starting requires too many steps, your brain delays. But if starting is instant, your brain accepts it. This is why even simple changes can have a huge impact. Putting your phone in another room, closing unnecessary tabs, using a dedicated workspace, preparing tasks in advance. These small changes remove mental barriers, and when barriers disappear, action becomes easier. Now consider something deeper. Your environment also shapes your identity. If you surround yourself with distraction, you become distracted. If you surround yourself with focus, you become focused. If you spend time with undisciplined people, you adopt their habits. If you spend time with disciplined people, your standards rise. Your brain adapts to what it sees regularly. This is why your surroundings matter more than motivation. Motivation is temporary. Environment is constant. Now imagine living in an environment where discipline is normal, where focus is expected, where progress is visible. Your behavior naturally shifts because your brain aligns with what feels normal. This is why changing your environment can feel like changing your life, because it changes your default behavior. Now consider another powerful idea. Make bad habits difficult. Make good habits easy. If your phone is always accessible, you will use it, so make it harder to access. If work requires effort to start, you will delay it, so make it easier to begin. This simple principle changes everything. Reduce friction for discipline. Increase friction for distraction. Your brain will follow automatically. Now imagine how this affects your daily routine. Instead of fighting yourself constantly, your environment guides you. You sit down, and work begins. Not because you forced it, because it's the easiest option available. This is how discipline becomes effortless, not by increasing willpower, but by removing resistance. Now think about the long-term effect. Every day, your environment supports your behavior. You repeat the same actions, focus, work, progress, and over time, those actions become habits. Habits become identity, and identity becomes your lifestyle. You are no longer trying to be disciplined. You simply are, because your environment made it natural. Now imagine the opposite, an environment full of distraction, noise, interruptions. easy comfort. In that environment, discipline feels impossible because you are fighting your surroundings every second. This is why most people fail. Not because they are weak, because they never change their environment. They try to change themselves, but ignore the system around them. And the system always wins. Now imagine taking control of that system. Designing your space intentionally, removing distractions, creating focus, making discipline the easiest option. Suddenly everything changes. You stop relying on motivation. You stop fighting yourself. And your brain begins working with you, not against you. Most people try to build discipline through actions. They create plans. They set goals. They push themselves to act differently. But they ignore something deeper: identity. Because your behavior is always aligned with who you believe you are. If you believe you are lazy, you will act lazy. If you believe you lack discipline, you will avoid difficult tasks. But if you begin seeing yourself as someone who is disciplined, your behavior starts changing automatically. This is the real shift. Discipline is not just something you do, it is something you become. Now think about this. A person who says, "I'm trying to work out," behaves differently from someone who says, "I am someone who works out." The first person negotiates. The second person acts. Because identity removes hesitation. It removes the question of, "Should I do this?" It replaces it with, "This is what I do." Now imagine applying this to your life. Instead of saying, "I need to be more disciplined," you say, "I am a disciplined person." At first, this feels strange because your current behavior may not match that identity. But that is where the transformation begins. Your brain starts noticing the gap between who you are and who you believe you are, and naturally, it begins trying to close that gap. This is called identity alignment. Now consider how this works in practice. Every small action becomes proof. You complete a task. That is evidence. You follow your routine. That is evidence. You show up even when you don't feel like it. That is evidence. Each action reinforces your identity. I am disciplined. And the more evidence you collect, the stronger that identity becomes. Now imagine the opposite. Every time you avoid work, you reinforce a different identity. I am inconsistent. I lack discipline. Your brain collects that evidence too, and builds a belief around it. This is why small actions matter so much. They are not just tasks, they are identity signals. Now think about how this changes your approach. Instead of focusing on big goals, you focus on small actions, because small actions are easier to repeat, and repetition builds identity faster than intensity. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be consistent. Now imagine waking up every day with a simple rule. Do something that proves you are disciplined, even if it is small. Even if it is just starting, that one action builds identity, and identity builds momentum. Now consider something powerful. When identity becomes strong, discipline becomes automatic. You don't argue with yourself. You don't negotiate. You act because it is who you are. This is why some people appear naturally disciplined, not because they are special, because their identity supports their behavior. Now imagine someone who sees themselves as an athlete. They don't ask if they should train. They train because their identity demands it. Now imagine someone who sees themselves as focused and productive. They don't wait for motivation. They begin because their identity supports action. This is the ultimate goal, not forcing discipline every day, but becoming the kind of person who does not need to force it. Now consider how long this takes. Identity is not built in one day. It is built through repetition, through consistency, through small wins stacked over time. At first, you may still feel resistance, but each time you act despite that resistance, your identity strengthens. And eventually something changes. The resistance fades because your brain accepts the new identity. Now imagine reaching that point where discipline feels natural, where starting feels normal, where effort feels expected, not forced. That is when everything becomes easier, not because the work changed, but because you changed. Now consider one final idea. Your brain always tries to stay consistent with your identity. If you believe you are disciplined, your brain will push you to act accordingly. If you believe you are lazy, your brain will do the same. So the question becomes simple. Who do you believe you are? Because that belief shapes everything. Your actions, your habits, your results. Now imagine choosing your identity consciously, not based on your past, but based on your future. choosing to become disciplined, and then proving it through small actions every day. This is how discipline becomes permanent, not through force, but through identity. At some point, every person loses motivation. There will be days when you feel tired, distracted, unfocused. Days when your mind tells you, skip it today, start tomorrow, just rest. And this is where most people fail, because they rely on motivation. And motivation is temporary. It comes and goes. It depends on mood, energy, emotion. But discipline is not built on motivation. It is built on systems, because systems work even when motivation disappears. Now imagine two people again. The first person works only when they feel motivated. Some days they perform well. Other days they do nothing. Their progress is inconsistent. The second person follows a system. They have a routine, a structure, a set time to act. Even when they don't feel like it, they still show up. Not perfectly, but consistently. Over time, the second person wins, not because they were more motivated, but because they were more consistent. This is the final truth about discipline. Consistency beats intensity. Now consider how to build this consistency. The key is removing decision-making, because every decision drains energy. Should I start? Should I wait? Should I rest? These small questions create hesitation, and hesitation leads to delay. But when you remove the decision, action becomes automatic. You don't ask if you should work. You work, because it is part of your system. Now imagine having a fixed routine, a specific time, a specific place, a specific action, every day. No thinking, no negotiation, just execution. This removes mental friction, and friction is what creates procrastination. Now consider another important idea. Lower your expectations, but never skip the habit. This sounds simple, but it is powerful. Most people think discipline means performing at 100% every day, but that is unrealistic. Some days you will have low energy, low focus, low motivation. On those days, you don't need to perform at your best. You just need to show up. Even if you do 20%, even if you do the minimum, because consistency matters more than perfection. Skipping breaks the pattern. Showing up maintains it. Now imagine this in practice. You don't feel like working. Instead of skipping, you do a small version. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, something. This keeps the habit alive. And often, once you start, you do more. But even if you don't, you still win, because you showed up. Now consider something deeper. Discipline is not about forcing yourself forever. It is about reaching a point where action becomes automatic, where showing up feels normal, where not acting feels uncomfortable. This is when discipline becomes effortless, not because the work is easy, but because your brain accepts it as normal behavior. Now imagine reaching that stage. You wake up and start working without overthinking. You follow your routine naturally. You don't wait for motivation, because you don't need it anymore. This is the highest level of discipline. Now think about how this transformation happens. Small actions, repeated daily. Over time, there is no shortcut, no secret hack, just consistency. Now consider the final mindset shift. Stop asking, how do I stay motivated? Start asking, how do I make this automatic? Because motivation is unreliable, but systems are reliable. And when your system is strong, your behavior becomes predictable. Now imagine your future self, focused, consistent, disciplined. Not because you forced yourself every day, but because you built a system that made discipline natural. That version of you is not different. They simply followed the process. Small steps, repeated daily, until it became who they are. And that is the final truth. You don't trick your brain into discipline once. You train it, day by day, action by action, until discipline stops feeling like effort and becomes your default state. And when that happens, you no longer chase success. You become the kind of person who creates it automatically.